ready to get started. Ready? Okay, if everyone's got their microphones on again. Okay, good evening. The hour being 6:53 p.m. on Monday, August 22nd, 2022. I'd like to call to order the Village of Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting. Bridget, can we have a roll call for the committee meeting?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Conroy?
Here.
Trustee Leclerc?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey. Sorry.
Here. You always did like him better. The first item we have under regular business is a review and discussion of a community-wide survey developed by students of the Industrial and Organized Psychology Master's Program at Elmhurst University. I'm going to turn it over to George to get us started, and then we have some very distinguished guests here to make a presentation to us tonight. So.
Thank you, President Garvey. Thank you, Village Board, for your time today. So as President Garvey introduced, about a year or so ago during the budget process, staff periodically has discussions about strategic initiatives, ways to improve our operations, ways to engage with the community a little bit better. And from one of those discussions during the budget process, we discussed this concept of doing a community survey so that staff, the board, the organization can get a better sense of the way the village engages with the community, the way the community perceives our operations, working with us, communications, all these sorts of things that we work on and try to provide services for the community. One such example of a community survey is the National Community Survey. It's typically a best practice used by many organizations in the area. But with that, there is a cost. We discussed this a little bit during the budget workshop last year. It's somewhere in the world of about $20,000 a year. And if you want to stick to it and ensure that we're benchmarking ourselves to other like communities, it takes, every couple years you do that, and you can do other surveys in between. And so we continue this conversation about finding a way that we can accomplish this goal, but maybe a way to pilot this program at the village. And it just so happens that organically, I'll call out Stevie, she was at one of the chambers that Tim sets up with staff at the farmer's market, and she met a resident that happened to be an associate professor at Elmhurst University in this program, where our students are here today, Liz Micah, I think, did I get it right? And so they had a conversation about this, and it came about that Elmhurst University has a program, graduate program, where there are students that, as part of their program, do surveys like this for organizations, and in the past they had done municipalities before as well. And so this conversation led to some others about how that tied into our initiative. And we felt that because this would be something new for the village, it might make sense to pilot a survey with a group like this, where we can engage with some students that are looking to grow and learn in their field and in their studies. And also the village gets a benefit of, again, piloting, getting a pulse of the community before we can make that recommendation to the board to commit the funding it would take to do something longer term. So with that, I don't want to steal the group's thunder, but we have our students here today and faculty from the program that I'd like to invite up to introduce themselves, and they have a short presentation to discuss the process that went about, the process for the program, and how we came about coming to the survey that I believe you saw in your packet that was prepared. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, George. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us. I'm Dr. Jessica Sim. I'm a professor at Elmhurst University, and I'm also the program director for our Master's in Industrial Organizational Psychology program. So in our program, we focus on training our students to apply the science of psychology to organizational issues. And one way that we do that is through our in-house consulting center. And so the interns here are actually part of our Elmhurst Consulting Solutions. So this gives our students the opportunity to work with internal as well as external clients like yourself. And as Josh mentioned, we have done similar projects in the past that are along the same lines as the Brookfield Community Survey. These include resident surveys and employee engagement surveys in park districts and other cities. And just so you know, the interns that we have here are current graduate students, and they do have to apply for and be interviewed for this job position. So I'm going to pass it over to 4 of our best students here. This project is also supported by 2 other faculty members besides myself, who have extensive experience in survey design. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Francesca Smith. I am a second-year graduate student at Elmhurst University. I'm also participating in the dual degree program held by Elmhurst.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Peyton Katowski. During the day, I'm an HR business partner with CDW, and at night, I'm a graduate student at Elmhurst University in the Industrial Organizational Psychology program.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Athanasiou. I'm an intern at JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, as a sourcer. That's during the day, and then at night, I'm a second-year student in the Industrial Organizational program at Elmhurst.
Marty Mikowski. I am also a second-year graduate student in the IO program at Elmhurst, and I work for the American Red Cross as a corporate fundraiser during the day. So I'm going to kick us off talking a little bit about the process, and then we'll get a little bit into the survey itself. So in addition to what George said about creating a benchmark tool, we want to create recommendations and looking at our expertise and using our faculty to leverage the resources that we have to give you something that is useful for the community. In reviewing the process overall, I want to first look at where we started and what we've done up to this point. In order to gain a more informed perspective, we spent time with George and Tim and department staff to understand what their needs were and what they understood in the community, ultimately determining that we needed to create a survey for them to start, right? So we created that survey to help us better understand the useful data that we could collect, making sure that any questions that we asked residents or stakeholders in the community was useful to them. We also reviewed existing community survey literature, inventories of sample questions, past Elmhurst research projects, the current village strategic plan, and then took those notes from our focus groups and surveys to kind of pull everything together to inform the development of the master survey. Always under consideration for us, though, are we asking the right questions? Is there any overlap between the questions that we're asking community members? And are the questions going to give us valid and reliable information that's useful to the Village of Brookfield? At this point, we have a draft of the survey, which hopefully you have seen. And that's completed using a methodology designed to capture mostly quantitative responses from residents, business holders, non-resident stakeholders as it relates to services provided by the village, while also gathering additional feedback on a variety of subjects, including awareness of the services provided and accessible, communication preferences, and then also diversity in the community. We are continuing to consider how we can mitigate survey limitations, how can we modify the survey length, what additional platforms may we use to serve the community best, and how we can maximize the response rate while also making sure that the survey itself is representative of this community. We also hope to provide outcomes that include a new data set for you to review, recommendations for future research and community projects, and then also a stronger connection to Elmhurst University and engagement within the IO program. I'll turn it over to my classmate, Peyton.
Hello again. So I will be going over distribution as well as the first segment or section of the survey that's in front of you, demographics. So for the distribution aspect of kind of distributing it to all of the residents of Brookfield, our plan is to use a software platform called Qualtrics to be able to kind of make it very easily readable, accessible to individuals. We plan on making a QR code with the link and kind of broadcasting it on social media, the water bill, as well as additional newsletter and other things that are going to be sent out to the residents of Brookfield. On top of that, we do want to work with the village to determine a good way to have paper options at the locations to be able to provide individuals who might not necessarily have internet access or may need additional help while kind of going through the survey as well. Additionally, we are going to do it not only in English, but we're also going to have Spanish options available as well. So in regards to the next section that is in front of you in the survey, it's going to be called the demographics section. That is going to allow us to collect not only information on how people feel about the survey and the community and the everything. It is mostly an opportunity for us to collect additional information and benchmark, how people are feeling and what kind of demographics that they're in, and to kind of see and provide a analysis of opportunities or recommendations that we can provide for you guys to use for potential courses of action. On top of all of that, I know in the survey section, it does say optional. A lot of the research that we did have multiple municipalities provide this section as optional, because no matter what, at the end of the day, the information between the community development section as well as the engagement and satisfaction section will still provide very good information and insight for us to be able to give those courses of action without necessarily being able to have a long survey to increase the potential completion rate of the survey for the residents. I will pass it over to Emily to go over the engagement and satisfaction part.
All right, so the bulk of the survey is going to be the engagement and satisfaction part. And the purpose of this survey section is to measure residents' satisfaction and their level of engagement with services that the different departments in the village of Brookfield have to offer. So the departments included in this survey are community development, the finance department, fire department, including emergency medical services, the police department, parks and rec, and public works. So survey respondents will first answer whether or not they have used these services. If not, they're not going to answer questions regarding their satisfaction levels, because that just wouldn't make sense. They're going to move on to the next department. However, if they have interacted with that department, they're going to rate their satisfaction level on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is very satisfied and then 1 is very dissatisfied. So we decided to include these specific services that you can see on the survey to be rated based on our discussions with key stakeholders in each department. So they're not random services. We really put thought into what we were going to include in this section. So characteristics such as professionalism, responsiveness, respectfulness, and overall quality will be measured. Those were things that stakeholders really wanted to look at from the data. So the data that we collect from these questions will provide insight on how each department is performing from the perspective of village residents, and will help departments determine what they're doing right and what areas may need change or improvement. All right, that's the end of my section, and then I'm going to hand it off to Francesca.
Thank you, Emily. So now I will discuss the diversity and equity portion of the survey. Throughout our survey process, we assessed various entities of the village of Brookfield and accounted for the population of residents. The diversity and equity section of the survey assesses how strongly residents disagree or agree that the village ensures equality and equity amongst the community. A few questions examine how services are accessible to residents with disabilities. The village welcomes people from diverse backgrounds, amongst many other factors that are examined in the survey. In sum, Elmhurst University is creating this survey to assess the various entities of Village of Brookfield and making sure that the residents are engaged and satisfied with all of your concepts that make the Village of Brookfield more welcoming. So we hope that you all enjoyed our presentation, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. If you have a moment, there's questions from the board maybe? The board members have any questions or comments, feedback?
I have a quick question. First off, thank you for doing this, and I'm tired just listening to your schedules, much less thinking about the work that has to go into this. But so what would the timeline look like to do something like this?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So it is flexible. There isn't necessarily a straight deadline that we have, but our determination in our pre-delimitary conversations, I guess you can say, we do think that everything can be done by the end of the year. We do want to limit like about a month of the survey just being live, so we do plan to kind of rolling it out by at least October, having it be all finished by the beginning of November, be able to kind of analyze everything, and then have our report completed, hopefully submitted over. Hopefully there's no bumps in the road, though, by December.
Okay. Is there a certain time of year that's better than others as far as getting responses, like during the holidays or after the holidays, or spring versus winter, or things like that? I mean, does that weigh into timing at all?
Yes, I think I agree that there's definitely periods of time where people might be more interested or have more time available. I think that the October, November might be actually an ideal time, because as you sort of intuited, December is where people might be a little bit more checked out and maybe might be checking their emails less. And I think that's why we want to keep the survey open for at least a month to kind of capture people's kind of daily routines and work. And so we give them the weekend if they need the weekend. But for those that maybe have more time over the weekday, we give them that as well. So I think that the October-November period is probably the most ideal with respect to survey collection.
Okay, and then once it's completed, how long for you guys to put everything together and?
Yeah, so I think for us, we need about 3 or 4 weeks to take that data, look at it, meet with village staff to make sure that we're giving you the information as you would like it. So our plan is that about 4 weeks of data analysis to pull together a report to then share with village staff or again, the trustees.
Okay, wonderful.
I appreciate all of this. I appreciate that it's going to be available in Spanish. I appreciate the questions about within the last 12 months. That was a great clarification, and it's going to help with specificity. I am excited about this opportunity to both satisfy our outreach needs and to help your class. I've been in your shoes. I've designed a survey myself for my master's, and I know it's tough, but I read through this, and it was very well designed. I think that it will be very useful for us as well.
It's obvious how much time and work went into this, and I know the board appreciates and staff appreciates it. I'm glad to see, when I first talked to George about it, we talk about communicating with the residents, and we're become a lot more active on social media. We have email blasts. We've kind of moved into Twitter and things, but we do have, and this is something that myself and some other board members talk about, we do have residents that are not necessarily online or electrically connected. So I'm glad to hear there's going to be some way besides email and QR codes. I mean, you say QR codes to some, I think CP Hall back there couldn't spell QR code if you asked them. But there has to be ways beyond that to get a representative sample, because we have a changing community. We have, a lot of young families, but we have a very involved senior citizen group, though I'm saying some of them are more tech savvy than some of us, but I think it's very important that we reach all different areas of our residents. I like just the open-ended questions at the end. Just, is there any, any services that are not currently provided by the village that you would like to see? I mean, that's always interesting to hear what type of things people are looking for, and that may offer things that we might not be able to afford or do, but it'd be nice to hear that. And I thought, the questions going through department by department, asking, have you had used any of the services offered by the Village of Brookfield in the past 12 months? And I get that question. I just, I think I know what we're getting at when we ask each of those things, but I wonder if it's a little bit different with the police department when you ask if you used any of the services offered by the Village of Brookfield's police department. I mean, that could be someone who called for police service, but you might also get some people that were on the other end of the police that maybe didn't call themselves. And how they, I think you understand what I'm getting at there. You might get some different responses there because they might not be pleased with the services, but that might mean that, our department did a very good job. But I think we need to survey across all departments, but I think you might get some interesting responses there if you get someone who didn't call for service but was asked to be serviced by our police department. So,
President Garvey, one point, and I raised this issue when we talked earlier, a word of caution for this type of survey, to your point exactly. There's certain departments, police, building inspectors, I mean, generally people have an unfavorable, anytime there is it's our job to be enforcing codes, which means that oftentimes we're telling people some things they don't want to hear, and they're not going to be really happy with that. And so, as a village manager, I just want to caution the board and the public to some of these responses may be negative, or generally negative. Maybe, I think I said one if it's towards the one scale. And just to be cautious that goes with the territory of what those certain departments do.
And I think I appreciate you pointing that out. I think that, the finance department sending out bills and water bills and, other bills, I mean, they might not be, but I like the way the questions are tailored in terms of asking about professionalism and responsiveness. They might not like getting bills, or they might not like getting inspections, but the analysis of their opinion on the professionalism and responsiveness, we hope people will be honest in their responses, even though they don't like getting a water bill, or there may have been a problem with their water bill, or there may have been a problem with their inspection. The responsiveness, professionalism, respectfulness go beyond, did you like the end result in terms of what you had to do? So, and I think those are the areas that we want to hear about because we can improve. So we really hope people are honest in their answers on that. George?
If I may, President Garvey, just to add to Tim's point, and I give the students a lot of credit because a lot of thought went into the nature of this type of survey, doing it with the system we're using. A lot of thought went into making the questions exactly as you described to ensure that we're getting valuable information out of it, that it's qualitative in nature. So I just wanted to give the students a lot of credit for artfully kind of crafting that as they went through their panels with the departments and presented the survey at the end.
And I appreciate you explaining that, if some of the optional questions aren't answered, people don't want to divulge that type of information, that there's still validity to the study and to the survey that you're doing. Because I could see some people might not want to provide some of those answers and those things, but there is still validity to some of the answers that you get from that. So, other questions or comments from the board?
No, I appreciate your work too. I think, the open-ended responses are always my favorite survey responses to read, just to see what people have to say besides checking the box. And my only thought regarding your comments about the services up above is should or could there be a question, an open-ended question up near the services portion if people have specific comments or thoughts about that as opposed to being all the way at the end. So if not to add more open-ended responses, but just if you wanted to get at that or understand why someone picked dissatisfied, maybe put in something open-ended closer to that question section.
Trustee Kaluzny, are you referring to an open-end question for if it's going to be a response on the negative side, or just generally at every maybe department to have one there, just to clarify for the students when we go back and make edits?
I mean, I am not a student in survey design, so you take my suggestion with a grain of salt, but it could just be at the end of the services section. I don't know if it needs a comment box after each department services, but just up higher and farther away, because the diversity questions are then separate. And so your comments might be more connected to that.
Absolutely. We hear you loud and clear. So the way I'm envisioning it is like maybe after each department, after they've done their rating, there could be a comment box that might sort of maybe just open it up to the respondent to describe how they interacted with the departments, right. Because going back to President Garvey's your point, like, were you on which side of the police interaction were you on? But also that if you have any concerns or comments, feel free to add, to kind of give a better explanation of why you did the ratings that you did. So that's something that we can add, and it can be an optional box that if people just want to go through and do ratings, they can. But if people want to express a little bit more, there's room to do so.
Sure. Yeah. I don't want everyone to have to read a giant manifesto after each section, but it might be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it would be good after each section, if you put it at the end of all the department reviews, that, there are five or so departments removed from their comments. I think at the end,
Sure.
if it, again, you guys are the experts on this, but I mean, I think Trustee Kaluzny's point is well taken, maybe the open-ended question at the end of each section, just specific feedback. I know the department heads would appreciate the specific feedback or instances. Trustee Cote, did you have something?
Thank you very much. Like everybody else said, we really appreciate this. It's a lot of work, and we know. When the data is already collected, when the data is all collected, and the results, how are the results delivered to staff? And then does that come with an assessment, or is the assessment up for staff to do, or it's a joint assessment? Or
So Qualtrics, kind of what I really like about the survey platform, if none of you have experience with that, which is okay, it really breaks everything down in really cool graphics, as well as a report that specifically outlines kind of common trends for specific answers. So if one person says no I haven't used any services like that, we might be able to pull that and see that and whatnot as like a very light example. So we plan on providing that information, and then also a report with our recommendations from the trends of what we provided, and we'll send that to George and Tim as well once we have that, and once everything is polished up and edited and reviewed.
thank you.
So Trustee Cote, just to add, I imagine once we receive that and evaluate as staff, we'll prepare a memo that will include that information and bring it back to the board for subsequent review. Correct.
May I just add, so I can imagine that the report might have a high-level summary of our results, but also perhaps broken down by each department so that we can sort of, connect with each department and they know exactly what recommendations pertain to them. So that could be a way that we could sort of create a report that would be useful to everybody. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Would this be an opportunity to possibly include, like, say, under Public Works, a question to the effect, have you used C-Click-Fix at all? Just to not only survey, but create awareness to something that's relatively new that people may not be aware of, or for community development, have you visited enjoybrookfield.com, again, to create awareness of these things that are available to residents that they may not even be aware of, but if they're reading the survey, that could help just drive awareness.
It's definitely possible that we can add, but one thing that I would just want to caution is that those opportunities for surveys that get longer and longer and longer have a lower response rate. So we would love to be able to provide you data with a good response rate that's kind of maybe smaller, and then plan out in future maybe cohorts, segments, whatever you guys want to do, for additional surveys to pull additional information as well, just so you guys can be able to get that response rate and that information to be, digestible, readable, and then kind of have action plans off of it.
Trustee Conroy, I appreciate Peyton's comment, and we talked a little bit about length and these kind of things, but I appreciate your point. I do think there is a way to weave in some of that information. Maybe it's at the end of the survey, the closing page, or even the landing page, where you can offer resources. So maybe it's not a question perhaps, but it's there as a notice if you're going to be taking the effort to do the survey anyway. So I appreciate the feedback. We'll take that back and talk about it and see how we can work its way into the survey.
Yeah, I agree. Those are good points to try and reach out. I'll defer to staff and our survey designers how it would fit in. I mean, we want to get the truest responses that we can, but going forward, looking for opportunities. I think Trustee Conroy's, point about ClickFix. I mean, I think, we obviously probably have some numbers how that's being used, but I'd like to hear how it's being viewed and actually get more people to know about it. So. And
separately, I can pull reports on C-Click-Fix that show you a lot of data on the type of services we provide and who's active and that kind of thing. So we'll do that separately as well.
In future surveys, if not here specifically, if other surveys incorporate that in there. So. Any other questions or comments from the board? Again, on behalf of the village board and staff, thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy people. We appreciate you coming out tonight and taking the time, and I'm excited to see what happens. So thank you so much.
President Garvey, if I may also just thank you to the board for your open-mindedness, just to geek out, on a municipal, professional level is very exciting for us. And, the students put a lot of work into this, so I just want to thank them sincerely for having to deal with me over the last however long it's been, because sometimes it's like herding cats trying to, Tim's nodding his head. I know it's been a long road, so I just want to thank them. Thank you to staff for your help and your contribution as well. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. You're welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting. We won't be upset if you have somewhere to be, because we know you got busy schedules. So you're welcome to stay, but we won't be offended if you don't stick around. Thank you.
President Kirby.
Yes. Okay. You just know Trustee Ketchmark stepped out for a few minutes at 7:20 p.m. Okay, we will move on to item 2, which is a discussion of a property improvement program grant request for 3745 Grand Boulevard. Kate, are you going to make the initial presentation? Yes. Thank you.
Good evening, President Garvey and trustees. Kate Portillo, Village Planner, and I will be quickly running you through the most recent applicant for the Property Improvement Grant Program request. This request for funding was made, for grant funding, I should say, was made by Mr. Andy Kwok. He is the property owner at 3745 Grand Avenue. He purchased this in February of 2020, so that's unique timing, I think, in terms of launching a project. And Mr. Kwok has been, he currently has a permit for interior renovations. His property is located in the SA1 Core Mixed Use Zoning District. I imagine you're all familiar with this property in some way, shape, or form. And so the interior work has launched, and in learning about this grant program opportunity, and also in consideration of perhaps accelerating the timeline for the exterior improvements, the facade improvements, he has applied for this grant. As you may be aware from reviewing your packet, he has provided before photos as well as a rendering of the improvements that he is proposing to do. He has provided staff with all of the required application documents, including estimates related to the scope of work. And the list, you can go to the next slide. No, that's okay. So you may have noticed it's a detailed list, but essentially he does intend to replace all of the storefront windows. I should start with what he's removing first. He does intend to remove the metal awnings and the mansard roof, as well as replacement of all the storefronts and second floor windows, and then the first floor is intended to have a stone facade improvement, and the second floor he is proposing painted brick, and the windows on the second floor will all have railings. So in summary, as you may see from the estimated cost breakdown as compared to the reimbursement requested, his total estimated cost comes in close to $90,000, and he is requesting the maximum reimbursable amount of $20,000. The other item I will mention, although it's very preliminary, is that he does also own 3717 Grand Boulevard, and he has approached village staff with some preliminary concept ideas that also support some of the station area goals for the village. So we anticipate you may hear more of that in the future. Mr. Kwok is here this evening. I can answer any questions you might have, but I may also best serve his application by allowing him to answer any questions himself.
Sure. Thank you, Kate. Would you like to come? You don't have to come up and say anything. I mean, the board might have questions, but we also give you a chance just if you like to come up and introduce yourself and say anything, or. Thank you.
Good evening. Yeah, so my name is Andy Kwok. I purchased this property, and we are working on it right now, trying to get it back to where it needs to be. Pretty much get everything up to code. Purchased this property was pretty much, it was a total train wreck, pretty much. So pretty much the whole thing was gutted on the inside, and we're rebuilding it right now on the inside, and we're waiting on this grant to start to work on the outside.
Okay, thank you. All right, does the board have any questions or comments about the application?
I'm excited to see this work. I would be excited to see it go forward. I'm excited that you want to invest in Brookfield, and I appreciate that you're using this program to try and improve these facades. It's going to look great. I will be sad to see the red brick go away. I admit I'm not a fan of the black paint.
So
that
paint,
said,
the paint is gonna be, it's more gray. The black, I think you're getting black because of its, I think it's black and white. But the actual color of it's actually like a gray. It's gonna be a little bit darker, but it's not black.
Okay.
It's gonna be like more like in the gray family.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Especially it gets so hot too. But regardless, this is a great project, and I'm happy to see it.
Other questions or comments from the board?
No, I agree. I've walked past this a lot of times, and really excited to see work on it, and the rendering looks really wonderful, so congratulations on the design work.
What's, I mean, when the finished building, when it's done, how many different storefronts or occupants do you envision having there? Is it?
Yeah, so the bottom originally had 3 storefronts. Each is on a 25-foot by I think around 60 foot in depth on the inside. So it's we're keeping that originally, whatever it was. That's kind of where we're going to keep it as 3 storefronts. I got 3 addresses, so we're going to keep it at 3 storefronts. And then above, it's going to be apartments above. So total of 6 apartments is going to be above.
Okay.
Above the storefronts.
Do you envision the storefronts as places for eating, or do you think it's going to be more retail, or what are your thoughts?
I'm not sure where the market's going to be at once I get this thing done. We are trying to make the front inviting for people to lease out. But as far as the type of businesses, we haven't even tried to advertise it, because the way the shape of the building that is right now, I don't see any point of advertising the space yet until we kind of get the front facade done, because it's not that inviting right now.
Sure.
I know during previous discussions, I mean, we've talked about design guidelines and standards and things we like to see, and I know that, the mansard roof being removed and things like this, I think are, goals that we've had. When we created this property improvement program, I mean, we admittedly said it would be kind of a changing document when we first talked about it. Certain things were going to be permitted or encouraged, and we talked about how we might expand it. I mean, this probably goes, in the expansion area of what we originally planned, but obviously it's also one of the largest investments. It is the largest investment in terms that we are asking to do a percentage match. So I know there's funds available within the program, and when you look at the potential impact or return on the grant, I think this is something the board should seriously consider, that, with the amount of money that we would be investing, that the end result or impact and further advertising for the program going forward. We've talked about how we have these funds available, and we've had some of the projects come through, but we're getting the word out. Can I ask how you heard about the program?
I think this was actually through, what you call it, where did I get, no, actually.
Andy, I think it might have, if I could.
Sure.
So I actually found some notes from Kendra, so I think actually that's who you may have spoken with initially, so that would date back to when the program was getting started.
Yeah, so when I was going through the building permits and the process and back and forth, and that's kind of where we kind of picked up on that there's a grant available for it. So with that being said, then I figured if there's a grant that's going to help out, we'll go ahead and do a little bit more than just, little cleanup. We figure we'll make a better improvement.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with you. It's a large investment, but it's also, 3 storefronts. It's much longer length of property than we've offered grants for before, and so I think it's a really good investment for sure. So.
And it's highly visible, highly visible district. And I mean, I was in the building years and years ago, and I know you had your work cut out for you in terms of bringing this back to where it's usable. So, our process is we don't vote on this tonight. We give the board a chance to think about it, discuss, maybe get public input. We would put it up, if there's support from the board, put it up at our September 12th board meeting to vote and approve. Does that negatively affect your timeline, your plans? Do you have enough work going on where you can keep going with that?
Yes, no, we're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
So if I think there's enough consensus for the board, we should give ourselves a chance to think about it. Put it up on September 12th? Okay. And you're welcome to come to the September 12th board meeting where the board would vote on the request. You don't have to be present. If you're not present, staff will notify you of the results. But I just want to say thank you for your investment in Brookfield and what you're doing already, and we'll see what we could do here. Okay?
Alrighty. Yep, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay, the next item we have up for discussion is the 2021 Annual Audit Report and Management Letter. So, Doug, you going to do the introductions? And Thank you.
Good evening. So the Finance Department has two main goals, I see it as. One is to provide a financial audit report, and the other is to provide a comprehensive budget. Tonight we're here to talk about the comprehensive financial report, or it's called an ACFR. The report represents the culmination of about 4 to 5 months of work. I would like to give kudos to Jessica Robner, who is the accounting manager for the village. She does probably about 95% of this work. So although she's not here tonight, I will let her know that I have commended her for the work that she put in on this. So the audit firm that we use to perform the audit is Selden Fox. Ed Tracy is in the back right here. They actually were on site for 2.5 weeks or 2 weeks. They had a very congenial and very comprehensive staff. And they did very good work professionally. I'm very happy with their work that they gave us. This is the actual report. It looks like this. You have it in a PDF file. I put one of these in your mailboxes. If you don't want one, if you don't need the hard copy, that's fine. If you could just throw it on my desk, though, that would be great, and I can do whatever needs to be done with them. But I know a lot of people don't need to have the hard copy. I hardly ever use it myself. But okay, so the comprehensive annual financial report is multi-page, but the very front part of it is an MD&A, and that MD&A basically discusses what is in the back part of the report. So if you're going to look at that report and you want to abbreviate your review time, I would suggest looking at that, what's called the management discussion and analysis section, and that pretty much gives a fair view of what occurred financially for the year 2021. As far as I go, I'd like to just point out two things. One is the general fund, which is the main operating fund of the village, does show a surplus this year of slightly over $1.2 million, and that's after transfers. So that's very good. I think that we've survived COVID, and we've come a long way in boosting that surplus. With that surplus, our ending reserves within the general fund are slightly over $3 million, which is 16.37% of operating expenditures, which is close to, well, not close. It's moving forward towards our 25% goal. So that's a good thing. The other thing I did want to point out is the funding levels for both our police and firefighter pension funds. I believe that the village board, the pension boards have worked together well, and all of you deserve kudos or a slap on the back, because right now our pension funds are funded over the 50% level, which is generally the norm for the state. Our police pension fund is funded at a 67.65% level, which is very good, and our firefighter pension fund is funded at an 87.22%. So I think that things have worked out well in both of those funds. Now, granted, the market had a lot to do with that. We'll see what happens next year when the actuaries come through, but we are well placed, and I think Moody's is going to look at those numbers and really be happy both with the surplus in the general fund as well as with the pension funding levels. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed Tracy. He's the partner at Selden Fox. Ed?
Thank you for having me here this evening, and again, we appreciate the opportunity to work with the village, work with Doug and Jessica. They both were very helpful, and so we certainly appreciate that. As Doug mentioned, the annual comprehensive financial report will be submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association, the same group that you got the budget award for, to get the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. The report itself, Doug mentioned the MD&A, the Management Discussion Analysis. That is really the place I usually direct people to as well. It's a nice narrative summary for the fiscal year. Preceding that is our independent auditor's report, and our report is an unmodified opinion. So that's the highest form of assurance that we can give that the financial statements that file are fairly presented in accordance with government auditing standards. Doug had mentioned about the positive bottom line, the general fund of $1.2 million. One thing I did want to add to that is that you received ARPA funding this year, and that's not part of that $1.2 million, because that money is sitting as deferred revenue at April 30th. December 31st, 2021, and that will be recognized probably in 2022. So you achieved that 1.2 million without the benefit. I mean, that's not buoyed by the ARPA funding at all. Another thing I want to point out is within the general fund is all major categories of expenses within the general fund, and by that I mean like general government, public safety, highways, streets, culture, recreation, capital outlay, all came in under budget. So there wasn't any area where you're over budget within the general fund. The other funds were almost universally under budget as well. The water fund was a little over budget, but that's because that's kind of a technicality because you don't budget for depreciation expense. So if you kind of exclude the depreciation expense, you were under budget there as well. We made a few small adjustments as a result of the audit. Those are included in the governance letter, which was the second letter you received. It's a short letter, and that letter really is essentially a boilerplate language in the letter itself, unless there's issues with the audit. If we weren't getting cooperation from management, we were having disagreements with management as to how to account for something, we'd bring those to your attention there. But absent that, it's essentially a boilerplate language. It just kind of it addresses specific topics and includes exhibits with the adjustments we made. And there's really two sets of adjustments to the fund financial statements, and there were just a few of those, and a couple of them provided by management. And then we convert those fund financial statements to what's called the government-wide financial statements. And these are more of a long-term perspective, these statements. So we make typical adjustments each year to record capital assets, to record the long-term debt on the balance sheet in these government-wide financial statements. So those are included within the exhibit as well. And those are, again, if you were to compare them year over year, they're just really the same types of adjustments that get made each year. And they come from schedules provided by management that we obviously audit. We did not have identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the internal controls. We do test the controls, perform walkthroughs of transactions to make sure that the controls are operating as designed. And the results of those were that we found that the controls were in place and operating effectively. So I don't know if anybody had any specific questions.
Thank you very much for your work and your help. I know the process is lengthy and involved for both you and village staff, the department heads, and the balances and checks that you go through to do this stuff. I received an email asking if I had any concerns as village president, and I believe Trustee Cote as finance chair also had the opportunity to express any concerns or ask about our understanding of the risks or fraud within the organization, and so there was the outreach there. So, I'm glad you pointed out the 1.2 million wasn't tied to the COVID relief funds, because I think it's a testament to staff and the department heads as to what we accomplished this past year and still came in with that good bottom line. And those funds are there, and we're going to use them appropriately. But sometimes I think some other organizations are statewide, point to great bottom line figures and don't mention, they don't attribute it to that, but we made that bottom line without those funds. So that's a testament to and I think this past year we've gotten more done than we have in a long time. So to do that and still come in with that bottom line is a tremendous testament to what staff's done. So. Do any board members have questions and comments? I know we got this, information in our packets, and we haven't had a chance to go through it all completely. It is a very lengthy document. Having it in a PDF form allows us to, review it on our devices in terms of having the hard copy available to us also if anybody wants it. But knowing that, does the board have any questions or comments at this point?
I just want to thank Doug for his work ongoing on this throughout the year and being on top of his game. He doesn't look like a hardcore Queen fan sitting here, but I do appreciate the work and the dedication, Doug. I mean, you're the one that obviously leads this charge, and the unassuming guy in the corner office that makes this machine tick. So I appreciate you being on top of this and the updates we get continuously, and this just further recognizes your efforts. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, well, thank you very much for your work leading up tonight. Thank you for coming out to make yourself available for the presentation and any questions. And we'll go forward from here. Look forward to having it filed and submitted. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, the last item we have up for discussion is a 2022 Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program ITEP grant application. Emily?
Thank you, President Garvey. All right, this is a agenda item where staff would like to request the village board's approval to apply for an ITEP grant. This would be an ITEP grant for streetscaping improvements, comprehensive streetscaping improvements, as outlined in the exhibit there. We did keep the TIF boundary line, that very thin red line in this exhibit, so you can see how a lot of the proposed work would be similar to the TIF boundary lines. Just briefly, I'll go over this and then we can come back to this exhibit if there are further questions and detailed questions, but go back to that. That's okay. Yes. So if we can just help me with the cursor, thank you. Brookfield Avenue, oh, perfect, thank you. All right. So obviously BNSF tracks here, Brookfield Avenue and Grand Boulevard. You know, when this ITEP grant cycle, the announcement came about, we did first consider just Grand Boulevard, but a lot of work has been occurring in the downtown. We really want to highlight it and showcase all of this and have this be a comprehensive downtown that's not just Grand Boulevard. So looking at the TIF boundaries and how we can encourage that development that we're seeing all throughout the area. So the yellow line indicates a full treatment, which would include lights, brick pavers, and street trees. So that is most of the downtown area. The blue indicates lights only. There's a small portion of orange that would be just brick pavers. Now, some of the reasons for this scope of work include just simply street width and availability for placement of some of these items, but staff did walk this entire area and really strategically consider the placement of all of these decorative items. All right. Also, really briefly, I will point out a couple just community board signage items that exact location may change, but there are a couple lump sum items like community boards or placemaking items and signs, as well as electric connections for any community events that may take place, similar to Music on Grand and things like that. All right. So this grant would be an implementation of the comprehensive plan. There are many recommendations in the comprehensive plan that encourages this type of streetscaping improvements. Also, it would rely on the design guidelines provided by Hitchcock back in 2018, I believe. So really maintaining a comprehensive aesthetic throughout the downtown, but also throughout the larger community. A couple examples of something we would see that would be a significant change would be the curbed style planter boxes for trees. Now this exact mock-up wouldn't necessarily be the final decision, but this is just an example of the change that we would see. Part of this is because that curb helps prevent some of the salt and the items that would help keep the trees alive and help maintenance for these. It would be much larger planter boxes, approximately 5 by 15, so much larger spaces for trees to grow and mature and flourish. Some factors to consider. This is very preliminary. This is really a high-level review of some of the items that we would want to consider. Really, tonight, we just want to understand if the board is interested in staff submitting this application, and if the board is interested in the financial commitment that may come with the grant if we were awarded the grant. Just keep in mind that details like specific areas for trees or resurfacing for certain streets, those could be included in the program, but those could also be added through the regular tree program, the annual tree program, as well as the street resurfacing program. So some of the streets downtown are scheduled to be resurfaced. So it's really a combination of all these programs plus this grant that we believe will take the downtown to the next level. Again, consistent with the village plans that are already adopted and really an implementation of those plans. And then I see this as being very much a partner with the private property owners of downtown. Hopefully, a lot of property owners will take advantage of the property improvement program in the coming years. You saw an example tonight. So really working together with the private property owners and the public way improvements, creating a very impressive change for downtown. So here are cost estimate examples. Now these may change, they can't increase. The scope of work could be scaled back, but the limit, the potential ITEP limit there, that can't be increased. We're pretty much at the maximum for that. Another item I want to point out is the construction for lighting. That is only awarded up to 50% of the schedule or the estimated cost. So that is seen to be something that would be funded at a lower cost than the 80-20% that the other items have. That's all I have for this presentation. Open to questions from the board.
Thank you. I'm sorry, thank you, Emily. And I know this was a lot of work, and I mean, I heard about staff, walking the area, and I mean, we could sit in the office and look at, maps and GIS and everything, but actually walking the area. And can you talk a little bit about, because I mean, what struck me originally when I saw the application was the thought of expanding the improvements to make them consistent, from Prairie, from Brookfield Avenue to Grant, and Grant wrapped around between Grant and Prairie. Can you just talk a little bit about the thought process there?
Sure. That is something that came about when we were first reviewing the grant application, and we really want the businesses and the community that's just south of the tracks, that really is part of the downtown area. We want those businesses to be considered part of the downtown, and also those streetscape improvements would be something that would encourage redevelopment for areas that would be appropriate for that. So we are really looking at this comprehensively, both north and south, really creating a streetscaping that is a placemaking element. So if you see these certain streetscaping elements, you're downtown Brookfield. That's part of the intent.
To that point, President Garvey, we had a lot of these same discussions when we were talking about creating the TIF a few years ago. A lot of this discussion centers around where does the village board want to see downtown grow to? And we talked about this at staff, and I like to think that downtown's going to be more than just Grand Boulevard. You're already seeing on Prairie, going north of Brookfield Avenue, there's some retail there. I think the natural outflow of downtown would be to keep progressing up Prairie to Grant. And if that's the case, while it's not that way now, by tying in these streetscape elements that we may do on Grand Boulevard to Prairie, to the south side of Grant and so forth, it helps, I think, lay the groundwork and the foundation for future growth of your downtown. Well, it doesn't, we walked Prairie, and right now it doesn't seem like, well, that's not really like Grand Boulevard, but that's today. But our hope is that maybe in 10 or 15 years, it'll all be, part of a bigger, more robust, what the comprehensive plan calls for downtown.
No, I agree. When me and you first talked about that, I kind of questioned why Prairie, and then it made more sense as we talked about it, looked at, and when you're, it's our main train stop, and as you stop at the Prairie Avenue train stop, you're looking down Prairie Avenue, so you'd have that visual. I mean, you see down Grand Boulevard, but you'd see the kind of the unified infrastructure down there. And, looking what's on that block, as you said, right at Brookfield Avenue and Prairie, there is some retail development, and I think there's other opportunities, that could come forward in the future. So this is an example of, not planning necessarily what we have right now, but what might be there in the future, and making it more likely to happen, down the road for redevelopment. And Emily, I know you were trying to summarize, which I appreciate, but there was a few things that, just a little bit more detail on the community board signage and the pedestrian barriers that you talked about. What types of, signage or barriers would you be talking about there?
One thing to clarify before I discuss that is those items most likely would not be included in the ITEP program, but could be added on through other budgeting process. But we don't have a specific design element for those. It would be in keeping in line with the other design recommendations through various plans and policies, but creating a place where the community could go to see continuously updated community events. That would be one intent for a community board. Providing pedestrian barriers and other placemaking elements would be the goal of some of those.
But Emily, what is a community board? What does that mean?
Oh, so essentially it's like where you could post a flyer for the concerts in the park, for just one example. But something that is truly a community event that maybe folks that are just walking around in the downtown would be interested in, and they come upon it organically, or folks that don't have access to electronic means of communication would know to continuously check that community board.
And I, the level of, depth and, future planning, I was really impressed with, talking about the electrical connections and things. I mean, we received a lot of compliments about the new string lighting along Grand Boulevard with the lights. And I know that's challenging because we didn't have necessarily the, all the electric we would like to have or things. So, I mean, just thinking big and planning for long-term improvements like that. But and again, I know you were summarizing, glossed over, but I was kind of excited to hear this. Can you talk a little bit about the electrical connections for possible larger events and why that's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. We hope to see more community events in this area. Some of the village adopted plans encourages events along Fairview Avenue as a way to improve intersection traffic flows, and looking at possibly vacating a portion of that street. But yeah, community events in general, we want them to be more easily accessible, easier for staff, public works or other staff, to get those up and running, and to provide a space that was intended for community events.
Because I think Tim gave the example right now when we have our very successful music on Grand, that we need a generator there, set on the sidewalk to power some of the stuff. But I mean, with the right planning, we could have dedicated infrastructure that wouldn't require a generator out there if we, with the right planning and layout. If, seeing the success that we've had with that, planning for that long term, and just, the things down the road. I mean, I like I said, one of the biggest compliments we received is just the feel for the lighting with the existing poles, but the string lighting and things like this to make it a comprehensive, feel for the business district. And I used the example with Tim that, you go through some other towns and there's, some type of sound system or the ability to play music, whether it's holiday music or themed music, through some, whether it's through the lights or the poles or something like that, to, that even planning for those type of improvements going forward. Can you, and the last thing, and before I'll open up the board, just what's the time frame on this? I mean, we're talking about getting authority from the board to make the application, but can you summarize what the decision point and time frame for this would be?
Yeah, so the application is due at the end of September. This is something that would support design and engineering studies. It would go through phase 1 and phase 2. Looking far out, there would be construction no sooner than 2027.
Other questions or comments from the board?
We have a little spoiled because we've developed a lot over the past several years throughout Brookfield, and a lot of that has come from applying for grants and getting these opportunities and getting them in time and getting them ahead of schedule items and finding those items. And then when it comes time to actually do it, we're like, oh, we have the money now. We can actually do it. I'm in favor of doing this because of that. A lot of projects that we have now are only because village staff was able to get grants in on time and do things ahead of schedule and think 3-4 years out. And if we're doing, I believe it's 5 years out that we're looking at here. If we establish this now, then we would be in better position to make all the other details that we want to, on how we want it to look, but at least we'll have the funding prepared for it.
I think it also speaks to the fact that we have the comprehensive plan out there and that we're using it. I know a lot of times we hear occasionally out in the community, oh, another plan, the village is doing another plan. But this is why we do it, because it is the roadmap that will get us those grants and get us the money to make these improvements and to get more trees along there. And I'm excited to see that we've included the electrical connections, because that could potentially bring events to these spaces like the farmer's market, maybe bringing that out of the village parking lot and into the community where it could activate the downtown area and give some more business to those downtown Grand Boulevard businesses. I think that is all very positive, and I love the placemaking elements. I think this is some great potential and very proactive by staff. I appreciate it.
Trustee Hendricks makes a very good point. The plan, we always hear about, oh, great, another plan, et cetera, but you're not going to get the grants unless you have a plan. And so you have to have the plans to get the grants. So that step is done, and going through all of that and having all these studies, et cetera, is what sets us up to have those grants. And then it all works in conjunction with each other, but it's a very good point.
Emily, what sort of detail is required for the submission of the grant? Or is it kind of a generic dollar amount for lights, dollar amount for?
Pretty generic cost estimates, which this exhibit helped us work with Hancock Engineering and Hitchcock to develop just cost estimates. Anything you want to add?
Sure.
Hope that's okay.
Derek Trico from Hancock Engineering is going to share some information with us. Good evening, Derek.
Good evening, President Garvey, Board of Trustees. So to answer your question, we put together fairly specific cost estimates with tree spacing, planter spacing, light spacing. We're not held to that, but that's how these costs were developed. So there are no, we're not locked into any design of planter, any design of lights. The spacing may change, that's all understood. But we did go ahead and do a fairly detailed estimate of cost so we could come to you with pretty good numbers for this application.
Thanks.
Okay.
And as I think Emily mentioned, this is kind of the maximum grant request, and it's a very ambitious application, but which I'm glad to do, and because and realizing that we might have to fund some of these things at different rates or through our own funds, but the target having the best finished product, we could invest beyond the grant, I think is the point. So,
right.
How does the funding work for this? Is it all or nothing, or?
Typically what I've seen awarded is all or nothing, and I know Emily mentioned that construction 27 might have been a little alarming because we're in 2022. I had to break the bad news to her. You guys are familiar with our federally funded projects like Burlington, where we have to do a phase 1 engineering report, get approval from that, then we go to IDOT, 6 months to review a design agreement. That's why that long time frame, but the good part for the village is we're coming to you with the general scope of work, but we'll do a phase 1 report and come back with a more defined scope of work. We can get public input. We can take a lot more time than we are with this application that's due at the end of September. And then even after that, you go into design engineering where we really get into specifics of where these outlets will be installed, and do we know if there's going to be a plaza at the end of Fairview. So there's some time to develop these plans over the next 2 to 3 or even 4 years before we would start construction if we're awarded this grant. I will mention too, ITEP is a grant program that comes around every 2 years, so we would apply and hopefully we'll get the money. If we don't, it's something we can refine and go back after in 2 years if we weren't awarded in this first round of applications.
and I mean, the criteria for awarding ITEP grants is similar. We've had ITEP grants before, but I mean, the fact that as Trustee Hendricks mentioned, we have plans in place, and there is some weight towards the fact that you have a plan in place and a comprehensive plan, and the ability to fund. We set ourselves up this because we have the ability to have the match and available and would be ready to go. I assume all those things factor in like the other grants?
I believe having these tied to those existing plans, the sub-area plans and the comprehensive plans, helps us score higher on our grant application. Yes.
Trustee Ketchering, I'm sorry, did you have anything else? And Trustee Conroy?
Yeah, so just, given it's, transportation oriented, can we speak to what plans there would be for the bicycle infrastructure? Would it be bike lanes? Is that part of this, or thoughts on that?
It is not as part of this project. This is really focused more on parkway treatments. Good question, maybe I can elaborate a little bit, is So Grand Boulevard and Brookfield Avenue running east from Prairie, we have put in a STP funding application. We're actually in phase 1 and design. You approved that a year or so ago. And funding is programmed for 2026 for resurfacing the 3700 block of Grand, and then Brookfield East all the way, really it wraps all the way up to Washington. It's classified all as a collector. We may be able to get advanced funding as early as 2024. Brookfield Avenue is tentatively planned for some sort of a bike route, whether it be, right now it's probably on-street bike route. And I think, and then Burlington Avenue is scheduled to be improved. It'll actually be improved from Du Bois, running all the way east towards to, I think it's Grove, where we exit into Salt Creek with a outlet. So, and that is scheduled in 2024.
Okay. And then also it just mentions that, I mean, the importance of stormwater management. I was just thinking, with the pavers, right now I don't believe the pavers that we have at the corners are permeable pavers. Would that be something we would consider?
We can look at it. The costs are not in there right now, and as Emily said, one of the things that's the limit of federal funding on these, on the ITEP grant is $3 million. So if we were to add some sort of a green infrastructure element like permeable pavers, the costs, if everything else remains the same, if our estimates are accurate at this level, those would be borne by the village.
But is that the cost because of the gravel you have to have underneath it? Because the paver cost would be the same, I would think.
Paver's about the same, permeable or non-permeable. It's the storage beneath it, typically some sort of under drain piping. And again, even if it's not included here, doesn't mean it can't be, and you're gonna go through phase 1 and phase 2 engineering over a 2 to 3 year period. So it's something we can look at, provide better cost to you, and the village can make a decision.
Emily, was that something you wanted to address specifically?
Thank you, President Garvey. I did want to add, in terms of sustainability, the tree planters would add impervious surface. So, I'm sorry, pervious surface. So looking at increasing that to 5x5 planter for trees within the right of way. And currently is it 5x5 currently, or it's not even, it's 4?
I don't think it's even that.
Yeah, I don't think it's 5x5, 4x4. So looking at adding a lot more natural area within the right-of-way, landscaping.
Seeing those raised planters, because, you know, we've planted trees before, and I mean, you brought up the point about the salt and the other, you know, trying to keep those trees alive is a challenge in a businesses. They're attractive, but seeing other places where it's worked, they're protected better, so the raised beds and the wider space to allow trees to thrive and grow, again, is, you know, when we put those trees in years ago, it was a good idea. It was our first step and everything else, and now I think we're moving up in, you know, quality in terms of what we are, you know, ambitions of what we want to do with that district. So I think those are big steps forward. Trustee Conroy, did you have anything else?
No, I don't.
Thank you.
I have 2 quick things.
Yes.
And they might be outside of the scope of this, but just something to consider with looking at other projects in relation to these. I know in the Brookfield on Foot session, there were a lot of conversation about bike racks down Grand Boulevard and in different sections. I know we're talking about 5 years out, but just curious how that might be incorporated into the plan of some of the things we're looking at, if it can be included in the grant. If you're looking for more, it doesn't feel like it's too costly, but I know something we're looking at for that section too.
I think that would be easily included with a lump sum type count, if that is something that at the time we're ready to make that decision that we want to include. Would you agree, lump sum?
It typically have to be permanent. Remember Tim King had mentioned. So certainly can add those. I don't know that they'll be eligible for funding. If you want to put a bench there, it has to be, you know, bolted down or heavy duty concrete. I think the bike racks are a great idea.
The beauty of this is a TIF district, so we're always going to have funding for items like bike racks.
Sure, wouldn't need to wait for 5 years necessarily.
Right.
Yeah, so we could always do that.
Okay, and the second one, just with the lighting, it looks like down near all of the Metra stops, right along Am I looking at that correctly?
Oh, sorry.
Again, this might be outside of the scope, but just something to consider when we were redoing Broadway, we kind of, I might have brought up this idea too late about adding EV readiness with the light pole installation. And if the lights are getting replaced again here down along the metro tracks where people park more long-term, it might be just something to consider. You could pair with a future grant from ComEd or something else to add some EV charging in the future along the metro tracks. I don't want to take away spots necessarily down Grand, if that doesn't make sense there, but the tracks might be a good spot for that.
We can put a placeholder in for that in the application.
That's a great thought, Trustee Kuznia. Planning for, like I said, the time frame here we're planning out, and that's, I just had a follow-up question about the time frame. So we're going to make this application, and then we get an initial, is the initial response kind of an okay that we're going to be able to go forward with the whole thing, and then we'll have to go through the other phases? Because I think it might affect what we do in general. I mean, we're talking 5 years out. In the interim, we're not going to just let Grand Boulevard and Prairie sit for 5 years. We're going to have to make interim improvements, but it might dictate what investments we do make and don't make going forward, knowing that if we're getting this grant, but if we're not getting it, then it also might dictate that we do some other type of improvements or other grant applications. So is that initial decision about our initial application kind of a likelihood that we go with the whole project, then we could start planning, what we do and don't do in that district going forward?
Yes, that's my understanding, yes. Yeah.
Okay, and Derek's giving me yes, okay. Trustee Klusny, more, or?
Only that the Beautification Commission will be very excited about this, and I will report to them at the next meeting.
Anybody else? Any other questions or comments? So I don't think I need to take the formal step, but is there a clear consensus from the board to move forward with the application?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's. Thank you for all the legwork on this, and real legwork in terms of walking the district and the plans. Very exciting, and thank you for all the work, and we'll be excited to hear back. Okay, that ends the items we have up for discussion on the committee of the whole. I will open it up again, the meeting, to public comment. Is there anyone on the right side of the audience that would like to make any public comment? Anybody on my left side that would like to make any public comment? Okay, hearing no public comment, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session pursuant to Section 2C5 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body, including meetings held for purposes of discussing whether a particular parcel should be acquired.
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by Trustee Conroy, second by Trustee Cote. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Conroy?
Aye.
Trustee Leclerc?
Aye.
Trustee Kuzmi?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned into